Please, don't go. We can face this together.
I have to. It's safer for you.
No!
I'm sorry.
Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching. The auction block stood in the center of Redemption Springs like a scar on the town's conscience. Most folks pretended not to see it, going about their business with eyes fixed firmly on the dusty street or the cloudless Montana sky. But James Cartwright couldn't look away. He'd ridden into town that September morning with only two things on his mind: buying supplies for his ranch and getting back before sunset. The Cartwright spread sat 15 miles north, a modest 1,000 acres he'd built from nothing after the war. It was lonely work, sure, but honest, clean. After 4 years of watching men fall in fields soaked red with blood, James craved nothing more than the simple rhythm of cattle and seasons. Then he saw her. She stood on that platform in a dress that had once been blue, her dark hair falling loose around shoulders that trembled despite the warmth of the day. Her eyes, green as spring grass, stared at something far beyond the crowd gathered below. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't plead. The silence around her seemed different somehow, deeper than mere quiet. Deaf as a post, this one, barked Silas Kern, the traveling merchant who'd brought her. But she's strong, young, good for housework. Do I hear $20? James felt something crack open in his chest. He'd seen men sold like livestock once before, down in the Southern Territories during the war. Had sworn he'd never witness such evil again. Yet here it was, dressed up in legal words and cold commerce, right in the middle of a town that called itself civilized. $20, someone called. Old Hutchins, the banker, who'd buried 3 wives already. It's not much, but it's peaceful. Good land. Good water. He paused, searching for words that felt stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. I want you to know I didn't buy you to own you. Soon as we get to the ranch, I'll draw up papers. You'll be free, legal, and proper. You can stay and work for wages if you want, or I'll give you money for a stage ticket anywhere you'd like to go. She didn't respond, of course. Didn't even turn her head. But something about the set of her shoulders seemed fractionally less rigid. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking a steady rhythm. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling grassland and distant mountains. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. I should tell you, James continued, speaking more to himself than to her. I'm not much for company. Lost the habit of talking during the war, I suppose. Lost the habit of a lot of things. He guided the horses around a rough patch in the trail. But the ranch is good, quiet, safe. Nobody's going to hurt you there. Nobody's going to sell you again. You have my word on that, and a Cartwright's word means something. At least it used to. At least I'm trying to make it mean something again. The sun was lowering when they finally turned down the long drive to his ranch. It wasn't impressive, just a sturdy cabin he'd built with his own hands, a barn that leaned slightly to the east, and corrals holding 20 head of cattle. But it was his, every nail and board of it earned with sweat instead of blood. He helped her down from the wagon, careful not to touch more than necessary. She stood in the yard, looking around with those careful, distant eyes. James grabbed her bag and his supplies, then gestured toward the cabin. She followed, silent as a shadow. Bar inside, he'd kept things simple. A table he'd made from pine, 2 chairs, a stove, a bed in one corner. He pointed to the bed, then to her, trying to mime that it was hers. Then he pointed to himself, and then to the barn, hoping she'd understand he'd sleep out there. For the first time she looked directly at him. Those green eyes studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, a small movement that somehow conveyed more than words. Over the following weeks they fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. James would wake before dawn, do the morning chores, then come in to find breakfast already prepared. She was an excellent cook. transforming his simple supplies into meals that actually had flavor. He'd leave money on the table, wages for her work, though he never saw her spend it. They'd work through the day, him with the cattle and fences, her with the garden she'd started and the endless tasks of keeping a household running. Pete talked to her constantly. At first, he felt strange about it, knowing she couldn't hear, but gradually it became easier. She couldn't hear him, which meant she couldn't judge him. Couldn't tell him his thoughts were foolish or his feelings inappropriate. "Had a letter from my brother today," he told her one evening, as she needed bread, and he mended a bridle at the table. "He's back in Philadelphia working at a bank. Wants to know when I'm going to give up this frontier foolishness and come back to civilization." James smiled. "Why?" "Without humor. He doesn't understand that civilization is exactly what I'm running from. All those people crammed together, lying to each other, pretending everything's fine while they stab each other in the back with business deals and social niceties." She shaped the dough with steady hands, her face calm in the lamplight. "You know what I love about this place," James continued. "The honesty of it. A fence either holds or it doesn't. A cow is either healthy or it's not. The work is real, and at the end of the day you can see what you've built." He paused, threading new leather through the bridle. "I suppose that sounds simple to someone from back east. But after the war, after watching men die for causes they didn't understand, I needed simple. Needed real." She placed the dough in the pan, covered it with a cloth, then turned to look at him. Sometimes he caught her watching him like that, with an expression he couldn't quite read. It made him wonder what she was thinking behind those green eyes. As autumn deepened into winter, James found himself increasingly aware of how much he'd come to depend on her presence. It wasn't just the clean house or the good meals, though he appreciated both. It was the way she hummed silently while working, the way she'd leave wildflowers on the table, the way the cabin felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep. One evening in late November, the first real snow fell. James stood on the porch, watching fat flakes drift down in the lamplight spilling from the windows. She came to stand beside him, wrapped in a shawl he'd bought her in town. They watched the snow together in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," James sighed quietly, his breath fogging in the cold air, "about how I bought you off that auction block, about how wrong that whole situation was, and how I can't fix it, can't undo it. All I can do is try to make things right from here forward." He turned to look at her profile, limned in gold from the lamplight. "I want you to know that you've become important to me, more important than I probably should admit. You make this place feel like it means something beyond just survival." She didn't turn, but he saw her hands tighten on the shawl. "I know you can't hear me," he continued, "and maybe that's for the best. Maybe if you could hear, I wouldn't have the courage to say these things. But I think I'm falling in love with you, Miss Evangeline. I think I've been falling since the moment I saw you standing on that platform, so dignified and brave in the face of something terrible." He'd learned her name from the papers Kern had provided. Evangeline Rose Mitchell, 23 years old, orphaned when fever took her family. The sparse details had told him facts, but nothing about who she really was. That he'd learned from watching her tend injured birds back to health, from the gentle way she treated the ranch animals, from the care she took with even the smallest tasks. "Anyway," James said, feeling suddenly awkward, "I just wanted you to know. Not that you can hear me, but I wanted to say it anyway. Seemed important somehow." He turned to go back inside, but her hand caught his sleeve. His heart jumped at the unexpected contact. She was looking up at him now, snowflakes catching in her dark hair, and there were tears on her cheeks. "I heard you," she said, and her voice was like music, soft and clear in the snowy evening. "I heard every word you've ever said to me, James Cartwright." James stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. But Kern said, "You're not deaf?" "No." She wiped at her tears with one hand, the other still holding his sleeve as if afraid he might vanish. "I let him think I was. It was safer that way. Men say things around women they think can't hear. I learned what kind of man Kern was before he could sell me to someone who would hurt me. I learned what kind of men came to those auctions, what they wanted. And me? James asked, his voice rough. What did you learn about me? That you're the kindest man I've ever known, she said. That you're honest and good and lonely. That you bought me not to own me but to save me. You offered me freedom the very first day, even though you thought I couldn't hear you. You've treated me with respect and gentleness, never expecting anything beyond fair work. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. And I learned that you talk to someone you think can't hear you because you're so full of thoughts and feelings that you need to speak them, even into silence. I learned that you blame yourself for things that weren't your fault, that you're trying to build something good to make up for the bad you saw. I learned that you're falling in love with me, and James, I've already fallen in love with you. James reached up with his free hand, gently brushing snow from her hair. Why tell me now? You could have kept your secret, because you deserve the truth, Evangeline said, because I couldn't let you think your words disappeared unheard, because when you said you were in love with me, I couldn't stay silent anymore. It wouldn't have been fair to either of us. What happens now? James asked, hardly daring to hope. That depends, she said, a small smile breaking through her tears. Are you still planning to sleep in the barn? James laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the snow-covered yard. No, ma'am, I don't believe I am. He took both her hands in his, suddenly serious. Evangeline Rose Mitchell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because of any purchase or debt, but because I love you and I believe, I hope, you love me too. I do love you, she said. And yes, James, yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, with snow falling around them and lamplight streaming from the windows of what would be their home. When they finally parted, both were smiling. I have a confession, Evangeline said, slightly breathless. I've been saving the wages you left me. All of it. I was going to give it back to you as a wedding present, if you ever asked, to help buy lumber for that new barn you need. Keep it, James said firmly. It's yours. You earned it. Though I wouldn't say no to you helping me design the barn, I'd value your thoughts on it. I have a lot of thoughts, she warned him. Now that I can share them, you might find me quite talkative. Good, James said, pulling her close. I've been doing all the talking for months. It's your turn. They went inside together, closing the door on the snowy night. James built up the fire while Evangeline made coffee, and they sat at the table talking until the small hours of the morning. She told him about her family, her childhood, the favor that had taken her parents and siblings. She told him about the fear and uncertainty after, about Kern buying her debts and claiming ownership, about the desperate gamble of pretending to be deaf. James told her about the war, really told her this time, knowing she could hear and respond. He spoke of friends lost, of the weight of survival, of coming west to find something pure and untainted. He told her about his family back east, about feeling like he'd never quite fit their expectations. You fit mine, Evangeline said, reaching across the table to take his hand. Exactly as you are. They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who came through Redemption Springs. James's nearest neighbor, old widow Peterson, stood as witness, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief through the whole brief ceremony. Evangeline wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric James had bought her, the color of Montana sky in summer. As they stood in the small church, promising themselves to each other before God and witnesses, James thought about the strange path that had brought them here. How an act of conscience on a dusty September day had led to this moment. How what had seemed like an ending on that auction block had actually been a beginning. When spring came, they built the new barn together, Evangeline's design incorporating clever features James never would have thought of. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, growing from a solitary venture into a true partnership. Years later, sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, their children playing in the yard. James would sometimes think about that day in Redemption. Springs. About how he'd intended to save her, only to discover she'd saved him right back. About how the deepest truth he'd ever spoken had been the words he thought no one could hear. Evangeline would catch him in those moments, would lean her head on his shoulder and say, "What are you thinking about?" And he would tell her, because that was their way. No more secrets, no more silence. Just two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that was honest and real and true. "I heard you," she'd said that snowy November night. 3 words that changed everything. 3 words that told him his truth had not fallen on deaf ears after all, but had been treasured by the one person who mattered most. In the end, that was the real miracle. Not the ranch they'd built or the family they'd raised, but simply this, that he'd been heard, truly heard, and loved for exactly who he was. And every day after, he made sure to listen to her with the same grace she'd shown him, honoring the voice she'd kept silent for so long. Together, they filled their home with words and laughter and love, building something far more valuable than any barn or fence could ever be. They built a life where both of them could finally truly be heard.